Ever felt like people step back when you speak? Not because you raised your voice, but because your words carried weight. Your presence alone shifts the energy in a room. You walk in with confidence, clarity, and purpose, yet somehow others misinterpret it. They call it intimidating, overpowering, even cold. But all you're doing is being yourself. I know this feeling well. There was a time when I believed honesty was the greatest virtue. No sugarcoating, no games, just the truth, raw and unfiltered. Until the day I lost a friend because of it. Not because I meant harm, but because I didn't see how my words, sharp as they were, cut deeper than I realized. It made me question everything. Was I too harsh? Was I wrong to speak my mind? Or was the world simply too sensitive? If you've ever been judged for being too straightforward, too driven, too strong, this video is for you. We'll break down the 8 signs that your strong personality might scare people, and more importantly, how Stoic philosophy teaches us to balance strength with wisdom. And here's the thing, your strength isn't the problem, how the world perceives it is. Drop a comment below. Have you ever felt like your presence was too much for others? I want to hear your story. Now, let's dive in. 1. You extremely blunt. You say what needs to be said. No sugarcoating. No hesitation, no concern about making people comfortable. When people ask for your opinion, you give it, clear, honest, and unfiltered. But then, you notice something. The same people who once enjoyed your company now hesitate before speaking. Their smiles feel forced, their responses become careful, and some even label you as rude or insensitive. They don't hate you, they fear your bluntness. Not because you're wrong, but because not everyone is ready for the truth. People don't always want honesty. They want reassurance, they want validation, and when you don't provide that, they feel hurt, even intimidated. But does that mean you should lie? Should you hide your real thoughts just to make others comfortable? No, honesty is not the problem. But unfiltered bluntness can be a double-edged sword. What you say may be correct, but how you say it determines whether it creates a connection or a divide. Controlling how you deliver your message is the key. Stoic philosophy teaches that honesty is not just about speaking the truth. It's about wisdom in how it is shared. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Speak the truth, but do it with kindness." True strength is not just about being honest, but about making honesty useful rather than destructive. I learned this lesson the hard way. Back in college, I had a close friend. We could talk for hours about philosophy, life, and our big dreams. He was ambitious, but also sensitive. I knew this, yet I ignored it. One day, he gave a presentation, one he had worked hard on. After class, a few people told him it was good. But when he asked for my thoughts, I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Your presentation was boring. I didn't understand anything. You should have prepared better." I thought I was helping him. I thought honesty would push him to improve. But the moment the words left my mouth, I saw his face change. No argument, no anger, just silence. From that day on, our friendship was never the same. I lost a friend, not because I was wrong, but because I didn't understand that the truth is not just what is said, but how it is received. Imagine yourself in that situation. A coworker of yours just finished a project. They are proud of it. They expect feedback. But instead of encouragement, you point out every mistake, every flaw. You mean well. You want to help. But they don't hear your good intentions. They only hear their failure through your words. This is where Stoicism becomes a guiding force. Epictetus said that we cannot control how others feel, but we can control how we communicate. You don't have to lie, but you can choose to express the truth in a way that makes it easier to accept. Imagine you're leading a team. There's a young employee who is full of energy but lacks experience. He makes a mistake you can't ignore. If you tear him down and criticize him in front of everyone, what do you gain? He won't be motivated to improve. He will either resent you or become afraid to make decisions. But if you take him aside, point out what went wrong, and show him how to fix it, he won't just respect you, he'll learn. Now think about your personal relationships. Maybe you have a family member who is struggling and making bad choices. You want to help. But if your words come off as judgment instead of guidance, they won't hear your advice, they'll hear rejection. There's a powerful principle in Stoicism. Be strict with yourself, but gentle with others. That doesn't mean you should hold back the truth. It means you should understand that truth, when delivered carelessly, can wound rather than heal. So, how do you maintain your honesty while avoiding unnecessary damage? First, pause before you speak. Ask yourself, is my goal to help or just to express frustration? Second, adjust your tone. The same message can be received differently depending on how it's said. Third, consider timing. Even the harshest truth, if delivered at the right moment, can be more effective. If you have a strong personality, people will always react to you differently. But strength does not mean being reckless with words. Strength means knowing when to speak, how to speak, and when to hold back. Because true power is not just in speaking the truth, it's in making the truth work for you, rather than against you. And that is something every strong personality must understand. 2. You keep your promises. A promise is a commitment, a bond between words and action. You don't throw around empty assurances. If you say you'll do something, you do it. No excuses, no last-minute changes. Your word is set in stone. People admire that at first. They call you dependable, trustworthy, and solid. But then, something shifts. They start seeing you as rigid and inflexible. They say you're unwilling to go with the flow. They expect you to compromise, to let things slide when it's convenient, and when you don't, they see it as stubbornness rather than strength. But is it wrong to hold yourself to a standard? Is it wrong to value integrity? No. The problem is not that you keep your promises. It's that others don't hold the same weight to theirs. They assume commitments are flexible and that words can be reshaped to fit convenience. You, on the other hand, believe in the power of accountability, and that is rare. This trait is not a flaw, it is a foundation. Without it, trust crumbles. If people know you always mean what you say, they may be uncomfortable, but they will also know they can rely on you when it truly matters. In a world of shifting values, being someone who stands firm is a rare strength. You don't need to change that, you just need to balance it. One of my closest friends, David, was the embodiment of this principle. He was the type of man who never went back on his word. If he promised to help you move, he was there at 6 a.m. If he said he'd meet you for dinner, you never had to wonder if he'd cancel. One time, his friend Mike made plans with him for a weekend road trip, but the night before, Mike decided he wanted to back out. He had a last-minute invitation to a party, something more fun. When he called David, expecting a casual no problem, he got something different. David said no. He reminded Mike of their agreement, that a promise wasn't just about convenience but about character. Mike laughed it off, saying, "Man, you need to lighten up, it's not that serious." But to David, it was. And when Mike canceled, their friendship was never the same. Not because David held a grudge, but because he realized something. People who don't value their word will never understand those who do. Now, picture yourself in a different scenario. You're leading a team at work. A big deadline is approaching. You've made a commitment to your client that the project will be finished on time. But as the deadline looms, your team starts looking for ways out. They suggest pushing it back and renegotiating. The client will understand. They say, "You have two choices. Go along with it, like most people would, or hold firm to your commitment." If you take the easy route, you reinforce the idea that promises are negotiable. But if you stand your ground, you set a different standard. You become someone whose word is unshakable. And in business, in life, that kind of person is respected, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Stoicism teaches that external events, like people canceling commitments or making excuses, are beyond our control. But our response is entirely ours. Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." When you commit to something, you are choosing how you spend your time, your energy, and your reputation. If you allow others to treat promises lightly, you do yourself a disservice. But here's where wisdom comes in. Integrity does not mean stubbornness. There is a balance between being firm and being reasonable. If someone truly cannot fulfill their promise due to unforeseen circumstances, compassion matters. Stoicism isn't about being inflexible. It's about knowing when to bend without breaking. So how do you navigate this? Set clear expectations. When making commitments, make sure the other person understands that your word is not casual. Evaluate situations logically. If someone needs to change a plan, ask yourself, is this a genuine reason or just an excuse? Don't waste time on unreliable people. Those who repeatedly break their word reveal their character. Believe them the first time. People might call you rigid, but they will also respect you. Because in a world full of half-truths and broken commitments, a person who stands by their word is not a liability. They are a force. And speaking of strength, what happens when that force isn't just in your words, but in your entire way of thinking? Next, let's talk about what it means to have a strong-willed, independent mindset, and why that too can make people uneasy. 3. You are strong-willed and opinionated. You don't follow the crowd. You think for yourself. When everyone else nods in agreement, you speak up. Not to argue, not to cause conflict, but because you believe in your perspective. You see the world through your own lens, and you refuse to compromise your principles just to make others comfortable. At first, people admire that. They say you're confident, decisive, and a natural leader. But as soon as your opinions don't align with theirs, their admiration turns into resistance. You've seen the look: tight smiles, awkward silence, the subtle shift in body language. They call you stubborn, difficult, and even arrogant. Not because you are, but because they are not used to people who stand firm in their beliefs. But here's the truth. Strength of mind intimidates the weak. When you refuse to conform, you remind them of their own hesitation, their own compromises, and that makes them uncomfortable. Should you change? Should you water yourself down to fit in? No. A strong will is not the problem. The problem is how people perceive it, and perception, like everything else, can be managed without losing who you are. A few years ago, I had a senior colleague, Daniel. He was the kind of man who never wavered. When he spoke, people listened. Not because he was loud or forceful, but because his words carried weight. He had clarity. He knew what he stood for. One day, during a high-stakes meeting, a client proposed a last-minute change to a major project. Everyone in the room hesitated, looking at Daniel. The client was important. Saying no would create tension. Saying yes would compromise the integrity of the work. Daniel didn't flinch. He laid out his reasoning. Calm, factual, unshaken. He explained why the change wouldn't work and why it would hurt both the client and the company in the long run. His voice never rose. He didn't argue. He simply stated the truth. The room was silent. The client wasn't happy. But a week later, when the project succeeded without those changes, that same client came back and said, "I'm glad we listened to you." Strength of mind does not mean being loud. It does not mean forcing your opinion on others. It means standing your ground with reason, clarity, and self-control. Now imagine yourself in a different scenario. You're with a group of friends, and the conversation takes a turn towards something you strongly disagree with. Maybe it's a business idea that you know won't work. Maybe it's a life decision that you know leads to regret. You have two choices. You can stay silent to avoid conflict, or you can speak up. Most people stay silent. They don't want to be seen as difficult. But you value truth over comfort, so you speak, not to attack, but to offer a different perspective. Some will appreciate it, some won't. But in the long run, the ones who truly respect you are those who recognize that your opinions are not about ego, they are about integrity. This is where Stoicism becomes invaluable. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoic thinkers, ruled an empire yet remained firm in his beliefs without being consumed by power. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." A Stoic does not argue for the sake of being right. A Stoic does not force their beliefs onto others. A Stoic lives by their principles, with or without validation. But wisdom is knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. So how do you balance being strong-willed without alienating those around you? First, choose your battles. Not every disagreement is worth your energy. Second, deliver your thoughts with clarity, not force. Strength does not mean aggression. Third, allow space for other perspectives. You can be firm without being dismissive. People may call you opinionated. They may say you're too intense, too direct. But they will also know one thing. When you speak, you mean it. And that is a power most will never understand. And when that power extends beyond your words, When it becomes a standard you hold yourself and others to, that's when people start feeling the weight of your expectations. 4. You have high standards, and you're not afraid to show it. You demand excellence, not just from yourself, but from those around you. When it comes to your work, your relationships, and the way you live, you don't settle for good enough. You expect people to show up, to be responsible, to hold themselves accountable. And you don't lower your standards just because others find them inconvenient. At first, people admire this about you. They respect your drive, your discipline, your ability to hold yourself to a higher level. But over time, admiration turns into discomfort. Some feel pressured, unable to keep up with the expectations you set. Others label you as too demanding, too rigid, or too hard to please. But the truth is, your standards are not the problem. The problem is that most people are content with mediocrity, while you are not. You refuse to accept less than what you know is possible, and that makes others uncomfortable because it forces them to confront their own limitations. Should you lower your expectations to make others feel better? No. Your standards are what drive you forward, what separate you from those who settle. But there is a balance between expecting excellence and understanding human imperfection. One of my closest friends is the embodiment of this mindset. He is successful, disciplined, and selective about who he allows into his life. In business, he demands the best from his team. In relationships, he refuses to waste time on people who do not align with his values. When it comes to love, he has one rule. He will not invest in someone who does not invest in themselves. He looks for ambition, self-respect, and emotional intelligence, qualities that take effort to cultivate. He's had people tell him that his standards are too high and that he's too picky, but he doesn't see it that way. For him, a relationship is not about filling a void or settling for companionship. It's about growth, about two people challenging and elevating each other. If someone sees that as too much, they are simply not the right person. Now put yourself in the same situation. You've worked hard, built a solid life, and refused to compromise on the things that matter. Then you meet someone new. There's attraction, there's chemistry, but something doesn't feel right. Maybe they lack ambition, maybe they avoid responsibility, or maybe they don't share your drive. You hesitate. You know deep down that their mindset won't match yours in the long run. At that moment, you have two choices. Lower your standards and hope they change, or walk away knowing that love should never come at the cost of self-respect. Most people choose the first option. They make excuses. They ignore the red flags. They settle, thinking that no one is perfect. And they're right. No one is perfect. But there is a difference between accepting flaws and accepting a life that doesn't align with who you are. This is where Stoicism becomes crucial. Seneca once said, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you." Your standards are not just for yourself. They define the quality of people you surround yourself with. When you refuse to tolerate laziness, dishonesty, or mediocrity, you naturally filter out those who do. But here's the key. High standards do not mean perfectionism. The Stoic approach is about holding firm to your values while accepting that no one, including yourself, is flawless. Expect effort, not perfection. Demand accountability, but also allow space for growth. So how do you maintain high standards without pushing people away? It starts with knowing the difference between expecting excellence and expecting perfection. One inspires growth and the other breeds resentment. When you communicate your expectations, do it with clarity, not judgment. People will respect a challenge, but they will resist feeling like they are never enough. And most importantly, lead by example. If you demand discipline, integrity, and ambition from others, live by those values yourself. People may say your standards are unrealistic, that you expect too much, but in the end, the ones who truly belong in your life will not be intimidated by your expectations. They will rise to meet them. 5. You have the ability to read people too well. You see what others don't. When someone speaks, you don't just hear their words, you notice the hesitation in their voice, the flicker of doubt in their eyes, the subtle contradictions between what they say and what they truly mean. You recognize patterns in people's behavior, understand their motivations, and often predict their actions before they make a move. At first, people admire this. They call you perceptive, insightful, and wise. They are drawn to your ability to understand them, to say things that resonate deeply. But then, something shifts. They become uneasy. They wonder how much you truly see, what you might have figured out about them that they haven't even admitted to themselves. Some people start keeping their distance, not because you did anything wrong, but because you make them feel exposed. The truth is that most people go through life wearing masks. They hide insecurities, they build facades, and they tell themselves comforting lies. And when they meet someone who sees past all of that, they don't always appreciate it. They feel vulnerable, as if standing under a light that's too bright. But should you suppress this ability? Should you pretend not to notice things just to make others feel comfortable? No. Your ability to read people is not a weakness, it's a strength. But like any strength, it needs to be managed wisely. I once knew a man who embodied this completely. He was older, well-traveled, and had met all kinds of people. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel like he already knew your story. He didn't ask surface-level questions. He went straight to the things that mattered. And because of that, people respected him. But they also feared him. I watched how others reacted around him. Some admired his wisdom, seeking his guidance. Others avoided him, uncomfortable with the idea that he could see through their pretenses. Even those who liked him were cautious, as if afraid that he might expose something they weren't ready to face. Now, imagine you are in a similar position. You meet someone new, and within minutes, you can tell what kind of person they are. You notice the nervous fidgeting when they talk about their job, the way their stories don't quite add up, and the forced enthusiasm in their voice when they mention their relationship. You don't say anything, but you see it all. This ability is useful. It protects you from deception, helps you form deeper connections with those who are genuine, and allows you to navigate social situations with precision. But it also comes with a price. Not everyone wants to be understood. Some prefer their illusions. Some fear being truly seen. This is where Stoicism offers clarity. Epictetus said, "Man is disturbed not by things, but by the view he takes of them." A Stoic does not use knowledge as a weapon. A Stoic does not expose others for the sake of proving a point. Instead, a Stoic observes, understands, and chooses their actions wisely. So how do you manage this ability without making people uncomfortable? It starts with discretion. Just because you see something doesn't mean you need to say it. Sometimes, people aren't ready for the truth, even if you know it could help them. Then there's restraint. Use your insight for guidance, not manipulation. Influence should come from wisdom, not from the need to control outcomes. And finally, there's acceptance. Some people will always feel uneasy around you, no matter how carefully you navigate. That's not your burden to carry. Your responsibility is to use your perception wisely, to help, to protect, and to build meaningful connections. People may still call you intimidating. They may say you make them uncomfortable, and that being around you feels like being under a spotlight. But those who truly value depth will see you for what you are, someone who seeks truth, who understands human nature, and who does not waste time on deception. And that brings us to the bigger picture. Every one of these traits, your bluntness, your discipline, your high standards, your refusal to tolerate ignorance or complaints, and your ability to see through people, paints a picture of strength. But strength often comes at a cost. 6. You dislike small talk. You've never been one for idle chatter. Conversations filled with meaningless pleasantries, surface-level questions, and social formalities drain you. You'd rather discuss ideas, strategies, and philosophies, things that matter. When you talk, you want depth, substance, something real. At first, people appreciate your intelligence and your ability to get straight to the point. But then they start to notice. You don't engage in the usual social rituals. You don't laugh at unfunny jokes just to fit in. You don't ask about the weather or pretend to care about weekend gossip. You're present but detached. And that unsettles people. They mistake your disinterest in small talk for arrogance. They assume you think you're above them. They don't see that you value quality over quantity, depth over convenience. But here's the truth. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. They fear what it reveals about themselves. And when they meet someone who does not need to fill every moment with empty words, it unnerves them. But should you change? Should you force yourself into mindless conversations just to make others comfortable? No. There's nothing wrong with valuing meaningful discussions over trivial ones. But understanding how people connect is key. I learned this firsthand. At a company I worked for years ago, there was an annual office party, a gathering filled with obligatory small talk, forced laughter, and conversations that rarely went beyond polite exchanges. I saw no real purpose in attending. I wasn't interested in discussing how much someone's child had grown or who was moving to a new neighborhood. So I declined the invitation. The next Monday, I noticed something different. Colleagues who had once been friendly were now distant. Conversations that used to flow naturally felt strained. It wasn't anger, it was disappointment. Some thought I didn't respect them enough to show up. Others assumed I was too cold to care. That wasn't the case at all. I valued my coworkers. I just didn't see how spending hours in forced conversation would change anything. But I had underestimated one thing. Connection doesn't always come through deep discussions. Sometimes it's built through shared experiences, through simply being present. Now, put yourself in this situation. Imagine you're in a leadership role. You're focused and driven, always aiming for efficiency. Meetings that go off track frustrate you. Conversations filled with unnecessary details feel like a waste of time. You keep things short, professional, straight to the point. But over time, you notice something. The people around you hesitate before speaking. They no longer come to you with ideas. They start keeping things strictly business. You haven't changed. You're still the same person, still focused on what matters. But what you don't see is how human relationships function differently than business transactions. People don't just want efficiency. They want to feel heard, acknowledged, understood. And sometimes that requires engaging in conversations that, on the surface, may seem unimportant. This is where Stoicism offers balance. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Adapt yourself to the circumstances in which your lot has been cast, and love the people with whom it is your fate to live." Stoicism is not about rejecting society. It's about learning how to navigate it without losing yourself. So how do you balance your need for meaningful interactions with the reality that social connections matter? It starts with understanding the purpose behind small talk. It's not about the words, it's about the bridge they create. When a coworker asks about your weekend, they're not looking for a detailed report. They're offering an opportunity for connection. You don't have to pretend to be someone you're not, but acknowledging their effort, even with a brief but sincere response, strengthens relationships. Then, there's situational awareness. You don't have to engage in every conversation, but recognizing when your presence matters is important. Some gatherings, some conversations serve a larger purpose than what's on the surface. Sometimes showing up is not about the conversation. It's about demonstrating that you are part of something bigger than yourself. And finally, set your own boundaries without isolating yourself. Engage where it matters, but don't force yourself into interactions that drain you. Find ways to direct conversations toward topics that interest you. Instead of small talk, ask better questions, ones that invite meaningful discussions without making others uncomfortable. People might still say you're quiet, that you keep to yourself, that you're hard to read, but the ones who matter will understand that you are not distant. You are intentional. And when that intention extends beyond conversations, when it shapes the way you react to ignorance or misinformation, that's when people start to feel truly challenged by your presence. 7. You have little tolerance for ignorance. You value intelligence, logic, facts. You respect people who think critically and who seek knowledge instead of settling for easy answers. But when you encounter willful ignorance, when people refuse to learn, reject reason, or cling to opinions without questioning them, it tests your patience. You don't argue for the sake of arguing, but when you hear something blatantly incorrect, something that could be easily disproven with a little effort, you feel compelled to say something. You challenge misinformation. You push back against flawed reasoning. Not because you enjoy conflict, but because you believe that people should think before they speak. But that's not how most people see it. To them, you're not being helpful. You're being difficult. They say you're too intense, too critical. They call you arrogant, dismissive, and even condescending. Not because you are, but because they are uncomfortable being questioned. Most people would rather stay in the comfort of their own beliefs than admit they don't know something. And so you become the problem, not the misinformation, not the refusal to think. You. But should you change? Should you stay silent and let ignorance go unchecked just to keep the peace? No, truth matters, but how you deliver it matters just as much. I remember witnessing this firsthand back in college. Our team leader for a major group project was a guy who was confident, sometimes overly so. He had strong opinions, spoke with authority, and rarely second-guessed himself. But there was one problem: he was often wrong. During a key presentation, another student challenged him. Not aggressively, not to embarrass him, just a direct question that exposed a flaw in his reasoning. Instead of considering the point, the leader doubled down. He got defensive. He dismissed the criticism instead of learning from it. The moment stuck with me because I saw how quickly respect can be lost. It wasn't his lack of knowledge that was the issue. It was his refusal to acknowledge it. Now, imagine you're in a similar position. You're in a discussion with friends or colleagues, and someone confidently states something that you know is incorrect. Maybe they're repeating a myth as if it's fact. Maybe they're spreading an idea that lacks logic. You have a choice. You could correct them directly, pointing out the flaws in their thinking, but if you do it the wrong way, you risk making them defensive. They won't learn. They'll just see you as aggressive. Or you could take the Stoic approach. Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." A Stoic does not argue just to prove a point. A Stoic does not waste time debating people who do not want to listen. Instead, a Stoic guides others toward truth without force. So how do you challenge ignorance without alienating people? It starts with asking questions instead of making statements. Instead of saying, "That's wrong," try, "What makes you think that's true?" When people are forced to explain their reasoning, they often see the holes in it themselves. Then, choose your timing wisely. If someone is emotionally invested in an argument, pushing back will only make them dig in deeper. But if you wait, if you bring up your point when emotions aren't high, people are more open to reconsidering. And most importantly, know when to walk away. Some people are not interested in learning. They just want to be right. In those cases, your energy is better spent elsewhere. People may still say you're too critical, too unwilling to let things slide. But those who truly respect you will see something else: your unwillingness to accept mediocrity, your commitment to truth, and your refusal to let falsehood go unchallenged. And when that mindset extends beyond just words, when it applies to people who constantly complain and refuse to take action, that's when your patience is tested even further. 8. You can't stand people who constantly complain. Negativity drains you. You have little patience for people who complain endlessly about their lives, but refuse to take action. When you hear someone go on and on about how unfair life is, how everything is working against them, how they never seem to catch a break, you feel the urge to say one thing, then do something about it. At first, people appreciate your no-nonsense approach. They admire your ability to stay focused and to push through obstacles instead of dwelling on them. But then, they start realizing that you don't offer the kind of emotional validation they expect. They want sympathy and reassurance that their struggles aren't their fault. And when you don't give them that, when you tell them the truth instead, they call you cold, unsupportive, even harsh. But you don't lack empathy. You simply believe that complaints without action are worthless. Talking about problems won't solve them. Blaming external factors won't change anything. Only action does. And that's what separates you from those who stay stuck in cycles of negativity. One of my friends embodies this mindset. She is fiercely independent, self-sufficient, and allergic to self-pity. She has built a successful career, overcome setbacks, and refuses to let circumstances dictate her path. But there is one thing she cannot tolerate: being surrounded by people who complain without trying to change their situation. She once had a close friend who would constantly vent about her job. Every conversation was filled with frustration about her boss, her coworkers, and the workload. At first, my friend listened patiently, offering her advice and support. But as time went on, she started to see a pattern. Every time she suggested practical solutions, updating her resume, applying elsewhere, setting boundaries, her friend always had an excuse. "It's not that easy," she would say. "You don't understand." After months of this, my friend slowly distanced herself. It wasn't because she didn't care, but because she realized something. You can't help someone who refuses to help themselves. Now put yourself in this situation. Imagine you have a colleague who always complains about their lack of career growth. They talk about how unfair the system is and how they deserve better. Yet they never put in extra effort, never seek opportunities, and never take responsibility for their own progress. You listen for a while, but eventually you grow frustrated. Because you see the truth, they don't want a solution. They want to be a victim. Or picture a relative who constantly complains about their relationships. They say they always attract the wrong people, and that they are tired of being treated badly. Yet when you ask them what they are doing to change, they have no real answer. They keep choosing the same kind of partners. They refuse to work on themselves. They are stuck in the same loop, and they want you to listen, but not to challenge them. This is where Stoicism provides clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." A Stoic does not waste energy on what they cannot control. A Stoic focuses on action, on what is within their power to change. Complaining does not align with that mindset. So how do you deal with chronic complainers without becoming frustrated? It starts with setting boundaries. When someone comes to you with the same complaints over and over, ask them, what are you going to do about it? If they don't have an answer, they're not looking for solutions, and you don't need to absorb their negativity. Then, shift the conversation. Instead of engaging in their complaints, redirect their focus to what they can control. Guide them towards solutions instead of feeding their victim mentality. Some will listen, some won't. But either way, you stay true to your mindset. And finally, protect your own energy. You don't have to cut people off completely, but you do need to limit how much space negativity takes in your life. Being kind does not mean being available for endless cycles of complaints. Because the truth is, some people don't want to be helped. They want to stay where they are, wrapped in the comfort of their own misery. They would rather blame the world than take responsibility. And those people are not your burden to carry. People may still say you're too harsh, that you don't offer enough sympathy. But the ones who truly value growth will recognize what you're really doing, pushing them towards strength instead of weakness. And when that strength extends beyond handling negativity, when it allows you to see through the intentions of others, that's when people start feeling truly exposed in your presence. Strength comes at a cost. When you are blunt, people call you harsh. When you honor your word, they call you rigid. When you hold high standards, they call you impossible. When you refuse to tolerate ignorance, they call you arrogant. And when you see through people's facades, they call you intimidating. But none of these things are flaws. They are signs of a mind that values truth, discipline, and authenticity. The world often resists what it does not understand, and people fear what they cannot control. That is why strong personalities are misunderstood. Yet the goal is not to change who you are, it is to refine it. Stoicism teaches that strength without wisdom can be destructive, but strength with control is unstoppable. Every trait we have discussed, honesty, discipline, high expectations, intolerance for negativity, and deep perception, can either isolate you or empower you, depending on how you wield them. So, how do you use these traits effectively? You practice awareness. You learn when to speak and when to stay silent. You hold your standards without forcing them on others. You stand firm in your values while remaining adaptable in your approach. Most importantly, you recognize that being strong does not mean being unyielding. It means being intentional. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like your strong personality made others uncomfortable? Have people misunderstood your directness, your expectations, or your mindset? Share your experiences in the comments. Let's build a space where strength is not feared but embraced. And remember, Your power lies not in how others see you, but in how you choose to carry yourself every single day.